artists around the world. Teaching artists around the world. Artists around the world. Teaching artists around the world. Artists around the world. Teaching artists around the world. Artists around the world.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you again for joining. I was just saying, I'll sort of reiterate for folks who just jumped on, but yeah, so today is the official release date for my first book, which I'm so excited to share. I've been working on it for a few years now, over the past couple of years, while I've been involved with the Alternative Art School as well, I guess since the beginning of last year, I've been able to bring a lot of the work that's gone into the book, I've been able to bring into class and kind of bounce ideas off of fellow students and teachers. And there are a lot of things in the book that kind of took shape during classes at the Alternative Art School. And some of it, might have changed or evolved in response to prompts that have come up and all that. So I feel like the book wouldn't be the book that it is if it weren't for my involvement with this school. I think it really played a big role in shaping how it ended up manifesting itself. So I thought, it'd be kind of fitting to gather virtually with some of my friends from TAAS the day that it officially is, birthed into the world, and say thank you for all of your, conversation and generosity and interesting provocations over the past, year and a half. And just for, being part of this amazing community that's been so inspiring and has been so helpful to me in my practice, and so helpful with the thinking that's gone into the book. So, and again, I think I know most of you, and I've just met Sandrine as well. So I was, thinking I could just do like a little intro on me and my work, but I feel like that might be a little redundant. So I'll do a super quick overview, I guess. So, apologies to those of you who already know this, but so my name is Sasha. I'm a poet. I'm also an artist and an artificial intelligence researcher as well. I do independent AI research. I guess, I've mostly have thought of myself as a poet for a really long time. And then my poetry, which has always had to do to some degree with science and technology and kind of thinking about the future. At some point, sort of, without me meaning to, that text sort of started jumping off the page a little bit into other mediums, into digital poetry, into visual poetic forms and concrete poetry, basically just sort of started to take on a little bit of a different form and has veered a little bit more into the visual art territory, which is what brought me to the Alternative Art School in the first place, is to really kind of explore that path a bit more. But I like to say that generally speaking, a lot of my work is at the intersection of text and technology. And I really am interested in bringing those two things together. I really spend a lot of time thinking about language as a kind of technology, about poetry as a form of technology, about poetic devices as tools, basically, about poetry as a kind of data storage system, or a solution to help us preserve information. I often think about things like meter and rhyme and rhythm and assonance and all the things that we use in writing poetry. Those are kind of little hacks that we've developed to help us retain information and make really important ideas and really important stories stick in our minds. So even before the invention of written language, we invented poetry as a way to make sure that we wouldn't forget things that were really important to us. So I've always just been really fascinated by the way that poetry and technology kind of hook together. And I know for a lot of my fellow writers, that seems, or has seemed in the past, to be a little strange. I think poetry in general can sound or can seem like something very ancient and very analog. And I think when I first started doing some of my my more AI related experimentation. I got a little bit of pushback from a lot of the writing community and from traditional poets who were a little bit confused about what I was doing. So I'm really excited that I've had the opportunity to really sink into using artificial intelligence and bringing it into my practice in some really, to me, exciting ways. And a lot of that is actually manifest in the book, which is sort of a conversation between me as a human poet and my human writing, and then generative text that is created by what I call my AI alter ego, this custom generative text tool that I have. I've taken this tool, which is already trained on, vast quantities of human speech, human information from the internet. And then I've taken that and I've refined it. And this has happened several times along the way, so it's kind of evolved, but I've refined this tool on my manuscript in progress, feeding it poems in work, feeding it research materials, notes, little bits and pieces of information, and trying to give it a little bit more of a custom sensibility, and then have used that tool to generate poems that are also woven into the book, sometimes in conversation with my writing, sometimes as standalone pieces. So the book is really, I guess I sort of think about it as a bit of a transhuman poetic collection. Again, just kind of a playful experiment, just me sort of playing around with language, playing with these new tools that are available to us, and just exploring what that might mean for me as a human writer, for me as a human artist, grappling with how and when to integrate these incredible technologies into creativity and into my my imagination in a way. So I think we can delve more into that as we get going, but I'm really, again, happy to be here with my friends from TAAS to share some from the book today. And I'm especially excited that Daniel and Casey agreed to join and have a little conversation. So both Casey and Daniel are, I'm sure most of you know, I'm sure, I think you probably all know each other, but they're both doing incredible work that engages with technology and art in very different but very exciting ways. Casey, I think I first met Casey, I think in my very first class, maybe at TAAS. The first session that I was here was, let's see, I took 2 classes, one with NATO and one with Trevor Paglin. And I think Casey was in that first class with Trevor. And I've just been really blown away by Casey's thinking on cybernetics, on ideas related to technology and how we can work together with systems, digital systems, technological systems. And he always has really interesting things to contribute to these conversations. So I'm really happy that Casey's here. And Daniel is another amazing artist who I met more recently at TAAS. I think in the last session that we were here for. But we sort of instantly bonded over mutual obsession with all things technological, like the liminality between the digital and the analog, kind of playing with the idea of taking the ephemeral and finding its physical expression and vice versa. And I'm just a really big fan of Daniel's explorations of technology in some really unexpected ways. So again, thought it would be fun for us to be in conversation today. And I think also because it's a little bit of an intimate group, like this should just be super casual. So I was going to ask both Daniel and Casey just to do a quick presentation on their work. And then I think we should probably just like feel free to turn mics off or turn mics on if you want and just join in. But the plan was maybe I'll read something from the book and then we can just have a conversation about some of the themes that come up. And, I'd love for everyone to jump in and get involved. Yeah, but so I think to kick off, then I'd love to turn it over to Daniel and then Casey, or I don't know if Casey, you want to start first, either way, but would love to turn it over to both of you to share a little bit about your work and how you're thinking about technology as it relates to your art practice.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Thanks again for inviting me into this conversation. It's really great to be in dialogue. I was super psyched to learn more about Sasha's work and Casey's work in Hito's class. And yeah, I'm really excited to get more into your new book, Sasha. It's exciting. I can't wait. So I'm going to be a little bit formal because otherwise I'll just ramble for like hours. So as you probably know by now, my name is Daniel. I've been involved with technology for a long time as a human being. In general, my practice utilizes found materials to construct assemblages that help mediate communication and interaction with people and the public. This project, Public Satellites, imagines the impact publicly accessible satellites could have on social, cultural, and scientific production. This object also acted as an archive of its local environment through collecting, displaying, and storing information from participant interactions. This project called Internet is one of the earliest examples where I've used interactive sculpture to spatialize dimensions like the internet. Swings on either side of the gallery were connected by a rope, so each participant controlled the other's swing momentum. This is a more recent project called Moving Messages. Essentially, I became a person-powered text messaging service. People were asked if they had any questions or comments that they wanted delivered to a person or institution. They'd write it down on my shirt, and then I deliver the message to another person. The receiving person would often send me to another location with another message. People took different approaches to their engagement. Some questions were quite broad and serious, like the one on the left, the question of what principles are needed to be practiced to move us, Northern Ireland, into a new era. A political question addressing the condition of Northern Ireland post-Troubles. The image on the right shows a tattoo artist drawing a dick pic to send to her friend. I propose to scale the project up to include many different social and spatial sites throughout greater Boston, but really this could be imagined kind of anywhere. And the messages would be relayed through running, walking, biking, or any other form of person-powered travel. In 2019, I started a 3-year fellowship in the graduate program at UMass Dartmouth. I've been working with installations to explore how digital products are indices of the environmental extraction of techno-capitalism. They are also complex systems powered by sophisticated computer science. These explorations have led me to consider aesthetics in relation to new media theory, systems theory, cybernetics, and artificial intelligence. AI and machine learning tools are all around us and are becoming increasingly influential in numerous fields. Many photo and video applications on our phone use AI tools. Here I've assembled digital stickers into new forms using the Instagram Stories app. Part of the fun in making these is seeing how keywords return different images, stickers, and the interpretability between image and text, which is a growing kind of area of AI investigation. My most sort of, my deepest delve into the technical and conceptual opportunities presented by artificial neural networks have come through looking at this area of research done by people at UCLA, where they're working with these diffractive deep neural networks designed to channel light through an artificial neural network in order to classify numbers. So it's taking the code and then sort of transcribing that into a physical form through these plates of glass. And then it's outputting a particular number. So you can show it a number and it's able to classify that number and it's powered at the speed of light. So there's no external power source. It's just light computation. So I thought this is really kind of fascinating, amazing research. So I designed a theoretical object based on these ideas. And so it's envisioned as a kind of full scale object where the posts are 8 feet tall, the panels of glass are 24 inches by 24 inches, and the goal of the network would be to square the circle. So people could toggle. It's the idea is to like enable it as an interactive sculpture, so people could toggle the different ropes and then affect the output image on the other side. And so the goal of the network, to square the circle is a relatively simple computational task, but translating that into the glass form is a much more difficult task. So, but I have worked with a computer scientist to generate the algorithm that is able to perform this essentially very simple algorithmic process of taking circles and turning them into squares. And so this is the sort of preliminary training data that we used, which was synthetic. So the images on the top, the circles, are the synthetic training data, which means that they're just generated by a computer. And that's what the algorithm learns off of. And then, the images below are the attempts to kind of to square those circles. And then the bottom image takes a hand-drawn circle. The bottom left-hand image is a hand-drawn circle, and the bottom right is the network's output. So it's sort of attempt at squaring the circle, which is obviously pretty hard to see and difficult to do accurately. So there's a little bit of refinement done to the algorithm in order to make it perform better, in order to understand the thinner lines and the different kind of shading or value sort of behind the circles. And so the image on the right is this updated network. I've been increasingly just interested in like how to reduce, like my approach to machine learning has been to like ask like how to reduce the information to its like simplest form in order to understand its operations. And so one of the current speculations is like how to essentially, can a neural network be used at the level of the pixel, of a single pixel, and what might that, what kind of results might that have if you're trying to reduce the network to a single node, which is possible, but it kind of defeats the purpose of the networks themselves, which are essentially used to, interpret, analyze, and relate large amounts of data. So it's sort of relational nature is kind of defeated by an over reduction of the network to a single pixel, but it's been a really interesting process to kind of go through and speculate on. And then finally, this last image I'm showing just to illustrate that I'm interested in is continuing to kind of spatialize these projects and these objects. So I'm working to kind of translate them both in the digital space and sort of design these theoretical objects, but also finally kind of bring them back into the fleshy world in various capacities. So this project, Teresa, is basically is like, suggesting the squaring of a circle. It's a kind of Vitruvian entity that uses the cyborg to draw circles on the ground. So the big beam spins in space and people can move it around independently.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I love your work so much, and I love seeing all these unexpected sort of materials and manifestations of the technological. It's really an interesting way of sort of reframing conversations about the digital. Thank you.
Yeah,
okay, Nancy, would you like to share a bit about your work and your approach?
Yeah, I'll keep it fast because time is ticking. So I think most of you know me already, so I don't know how much you want to know. I've already let's see, I used to show a bunch, exhibit a bunch, and I was like, why am I making art? Like, what is this? And so I stopped, and then I started designing forest gardens. So that uses, just to make sure I'm tying, that uses a lot of systems thinking, and then it started making me at Socrates Sculpture Park, and then on a swale that floats around Governor's Island. And then I went to MIT's Art, Culture, and Technology program. And that's where I was able to do like deeper research into systems thinking, which goes back to technology, particularly cybernetics at the end of World War II. But then sort of finding out like these touch points of complications, like why things branched the way they did, essentially. It's like, so maybe there's something to share. So I'll share this slide, I guess maybe. So this is not really work related, but let me see this, yeah. So yeah, this is probably better to talk over this thing. Let's see, yeah, so cybernetics, sort of tracing the idea of systems and how they changed over time, and how it affected the world at each change. And sort of how does artists respond to that, and sort of like why the role of the artist and why art is not as good as it used to be in some sense of dampening things. It's more of, seems like a luxury product more and more. And sort of technology has replaced sort of, I don't know, there's something going on that I'm not sure about, but I'm still questioning. But anyway, these are basically talking about how systems changed over time and how and why it changed. And this is interesting here. There's this sort of a big branch, sort of when cybernetics came out, it kind of diverged into two schools, sort of the physicists and the engineers, and the like anthropologists, sociologists, and biologists, and they view the world very differently. So one of them is sort of a naturalism, which is the physicist, and then the other side, anthropologists and ecologies, are constructivism. This is sort of a really important point, and this also affected computation as well. Like we used the von Neumann model computation architecture, which is actually that's why we have Moore's law. It's not because of anything particular to technology itself. It's just because we prescribe to a certain technology, which has changed the course of history, or why we are here now. So yeah, just thinking about that stuff. Yeah, now, you know, we're kind of at synthetic biology at this point. So people are kind of freaking out by AI, but I feel like, yeah, AI is interesting. Of course, you have the sort of governance problems and all these things like that, but synthetic biology is really crazy. Yeah, the two together would be really interesting, I guess. Anyway, yeah, and yeah, so now I have like, right now I have a fellowship, working on some writing and research at this Kronos Art Center in Shanghai. So just continuing sort of my work that I started at MIT, sort of searching for like a metaphysics, of course, and that's kind of what I figured out at school, and then more about like lived experience of phenomenology that matches with sort of being in the world, and not just this other kind of the more constructivist point of view, not the naturalism that leads to all sorts of issues. And currently right now I'm super into category theory. If people are interested, it's kind of new mathematics that came out of MIT in 2018, applied category theory. So this has interesting promise, I think, in terms of like organizing our level of society in terms of its complexity and size. So that's where I'm at.
Amazing. Thank you, Casey. Yeah, I feel like you have turned research into an art form all its own. And it's always so interesting hearing you present everything that you're thinking about and working on. And for anyone who doesn't know, Casey's like the go-to person if you have questions about anything relating to cybernetics, anything tangentially related to that subject area, systems thinking and all that. He is a wellspring of amazing resources and information. Yeah, thank you both so much for sharing a bit about your work. And I'm so inspired by everything that you're doing. I think one of the reasons that I've loved being at the Alternative Art School is that as someone who comes from more of a literary background and never really considered myself an artist, it's so inspiring to me to see all the different ways that you can grapple with, you know, a common question or a common theme, and just to understand all the different ways that can take your imagination. And one of the reasons that I wanted to share the book with you guys, and why I think it's relevant to the TAAS communities, because it's very much a hybrid of poetry and art as well. It's part poetry collection, part language experiments with AI, and then a lot of it is also visual art incorporated throughout. So for example, the graphic on the front, for example, is from, I don't know if you guys can see that, but that graphic is basically, it's the title Technelegy spelled in cursive binary, which is a language that I've sort of created that's a fusion of my handwriting and binary code, or computer speak. And it's basically just a system of zeros and ones using this very, very simple, two-part system in order to encode very complex ideas and thoughts. And I've always been really intrigued by the idea of binary code, the concept behind it, and all that it sort of signals. The idea of taking something very simplistic and using it to ladder up to big ideas. And then I think I'm also just very taken by some of the graphic qualities of it, and a lot of my work, which I'll show a couple of very quick slides of things that are also in the book. But a lot of the visual art that's in the book and that I am working on now has to do with using binary code as concrete poetry in a way. So this, by the way, this first slide is just, so this is me in conversation with a humanoid android named Bina48, who I've been mentoring in poetry since 2018. We basically have just been working on sort of a conceptual research project about why robots might value poetry, whether they should value poetry, whether humans should put time and effort into teaching robots about art and culture and literature. So she is sort of a muse for a lot of the work that I'm doing. She's a muse for the book. And there's actually a very long poem in the book that is a persona poem written as Bina48. She's just sort of a touchstone for a lot of the thinking that I do about human and machine collaboration. A lot of that comes from being able to actually sit across from her and engage in conversation with her. But I wanted to just very quickly, for anyone who hasn't seen it, just share a couple examples of some of the visual binary poetry that I've been working on, and that's in the book. So this is another example of the cursive binary language, which I think is really more of a trans-binary language. It's really about transcending the binary system and sort of reaching something a little bit more interlinked and complex. This is from a series called Analog Binary Code, where basically the inspiration behind this is I was just working at my computer one day and got completely sick of being in front of the screen, and went outside and just found myself picking up all these black walnuts off the ground and being so enchanted by the weight and the heft of them. And I just started coding binary code in these natural elements under their source tree, so where they had fallen down off the branches. And I like to think a lot about the connection between nature and technology. And this whole series has sort of been a nice way of getting to explore that, and also getting to think about the technological and the digital without constantly being, mediating through my screen and through my digital devices. So that's a series that I've really enjoyed working on. This is from a series called Ancient Binary, which is also in the book. And Ancient Binary is sort of my consideration of thinking about questions of deep time and thinking about poetry as a technology that enables us to sort of transcend time and move through space. And basically what it is translations of some of the most ancient lines of human poetry ever written, transposed and translated into binary code and sort of preserved as a future archive. So again, like fragments of human imagination preserved for potentially non-human audience. And then, so actually, I just want to skip ahead because I know we are running short on time and I want to have a group convo, but I did sort of want to read a couple things just quickly to kick off our conversation. And so this is a page from the book, and this is an example of a poem that I had actually written a few years ago, The Salvages, which was inspired by a line from T.S. Eliot. And the line that Eliot had written was the line, "I don't know much about gods." And I was always, very taken by that line and was inspired to write a whole poem that kind of riffed on it. And once I started using artificial intelligence and language tools in my writing practice and using generative text tools, I started realizing that basically the process that's involved there is you take a line as a prompt, you feed it into the computer interface, and you then kind of get involved in an interactive, collaborative effort with the machine, with this artificial intelligence. And so to me, that was kind of an interesting sort of evolution of what I think, all artists and all poets do to some extent, which is to riff on inspiration from those who've come before us and to kind of take that in and refract it through our own imagination and our own our own mind file, all the things we've learned and all the things we've come across in our lifetimes, and refract it and then create something that is ours and that is unique and that is different. So I wanted to just read this quickly just to kind of show the conversation between my human poem, and then this is the AI generated version of the poem at the bottom of the page. So The Salvages, after T.S. Eliot. I don't know much about gods, but I think they must live inside copper and glass and silicon, just as they do in the roiling waves, the tides, the moon, ascension of heavy steel tubes traversing the Atlantic, fearful views from on high, fueled by their magic, the mystic haze steaming off phthalates and liquid crystals, dark clouds of dust and smoke, the roll of a thunderball, all home to gods and their demons. In the supernature of unseen wires, unreal voices in the tongue of our creator, in the holy flock of stern celestial eyes and fires burning lightning quick in our great dark seas, in the bromine and polymers, mercury and lead of devices we must inter with respect when dead, lest the ether off carcasses left to rest come back like unfinished souls to haunt us. So this is an example of one of the poems that I had originally started training this AI writing tool on. So it has this somewhere in its training data set. And so when I went back and started engaging with the AI to write some poetic texts, I used that first line again as a prompt. And what's at the bottom of the page is one of the responses that the AI came back with. I don't know much about gods, but I think they must have something to do with endurance, their tenuous connection with the bodily world, their necessity for the ecological protection of humankind. They may have something to do with music and speech and love. I think of them as supporting the rest of the mind. I think they might have something to do with beauty itself. That was a beautiful opening line. I have no intention of dying. So with that, let me stop sharing. And I would say let's maybe jump from that AI poem maybe into a conversation about how we use artificial intelligence in our practices, or how we use technology in our practices. And I guess, again, I would invite if anybody else wants to join in as well. But Casey and Daniel, I don't know if you want to chime in with maybe thoughts on how you've experienced human machine collaboration in your own creative practices. Or I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in, or I can talk about it.
I pressed the wrong button. I almost left the conversation. It's been interesting to feed like there's this sort of, I don't know, the like technical relationship in that I've been working with a computer scientist. So I've been lucky enough to be able to say like, this is what, you know, I want the thing to do. And then like we try it and it's like, well, it didn't quite do that. Like maybe so like we trained it with synthetic data, and then the algorithms like benefit with the more and more varied amounts of data that they receive. But my approach has been to like do as little as use as little data as possible and do it in a synthetic way. So it's not based on previous data sets. And so at some point after the synthetic data created after it was able to then interpret an image, I thought it would, I was trying to basically speak back to the algorithm by hand drawing circles. So like I'm then hand drawing circles in a way so that it's easier for the algorithm to identify what the objects are. Because if I were to like give it, say, an image of my face, like it's way too complicated to try to take my face and turn it into understand my face as a series of circles and then translate those into squares. So like I wanted to like participate in this, in a language that it understood by hand drawing these circles. And so there is an interesting interplay when you start to like go through that process, and that it's always sort of iterative in that fashion, and it's always going back and forth between sort of the human and the machine. But then in general, like, that's like the specific technical, but we're also always using AI algorithms like every time we open our phones. Like, it's hard to not, at this point, it's like you would have to be pretty intentional to like not use AI as like a tool, because it's embedded in so much of the software that we use, or it's just sort of it's in the internet in various capacities as well. So it's also like if you're participating in digital culture as like at a base level, you're already interacting in different ways.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I feel like I have a tendency to maybe anthropomorphize a bit when I'm working with a lot of these AI. I mean, in the example of Bina 48, who I showed in that first picture, it's literally because it's a humanoid robot who's based on a human. And so I think there I'm a little bit justified in calling it, her, talking about her, and not saying the system or the machine or something like that. She has a persona and all of that. And I think, to some extent, when I'm working with some of these writing programs too, they're literally just an interface on a screen. There's like a little box that you're typing into, and then you're changing the parameters. So there's nothing humanoid about that. It's literally just an interface. But I often feel like it doesn't feel like I'm using a tool. It honestly feels more like I'm collaborating with another writer. And I'm sitting there kind of, I'm literally, well, not literally, but it very much feels like I'm brainstorming and just sort of linked to another mind. So it's very weird, because on the one hand, I totally agree. And I think we're using so many AI tools on a daily basis that we don't think twice about. And then I get a chance to use AI tools, for creative purposes where I feel very tenderly towards them. So it's very funny how different AI almost have different roles in your life and different identities and different personalities and all that. It's a very strange thing. I don't know, Casey, have you had experiences with this sort of idea?
I've experimented with AI at school. Like there was like in the media lab, there were like these sort of creative AI workshops and stuff like that. So it was, yeah, I learned about it, but I never actually it was never to me appealing to use it because this is also maybe I don't think I think it's kind of I don't there's like a term there's Caroline Jones, our historian, is like kind of she calls it like dumb AI or something like that.
Yeah.
Thinks AI is dumb. And so I mean neural networks, which is like deep learning, is a certain type of AI.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's also like what they call old-fashioned AI or symbolic AI. And so that doesn't form a black box. But that was sort of one of they were both around. Neural networks are the ones being used now. Symbolic AI, to me, sounds more interesting. So I'm learning category theory. So like with category theory, which is the new map. I mean, this is maybe a tangent, but with that, so the problem with why neural nets won out is because symbolic AI couldn't scale. So it's actually, and you can actually figure out where you can trace things, like the operator can actually figure out how it's working. Mm-hmm. And it uses symbols in the AI, and then that you have hierarchies with the symbolic AI, and neural networks are not. You just feed it, and it's just like hungry for data. And that's why it takes so much data, actually, because and that's why it's kind of considered dumb. That feed it so much data, and it takes a lot of processing power. So, yeah, so that's why. And then with the future, like it actually was opposite. Neural networks couldn't scale because there was not enough processing power. And then at one point in time, symbolic AI couldn't scale because it couldn't handle the way it operated. It couldn't handle it couldn't react in real time. You couldn't use it for like cars and stuff like that. But with category theory, which is a new mathematics that's coming out, that's in 2021, there's a company spun off that is applying category theory to databases. And so now you can put symbolic AI into it. So that's kind of where I'm interested in. So I just never experimented with it because to me, it didn't fit my construct of what I wanted to do essentially.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it was sort of just made me think a little bit about this question, which has come up in our previous conversations again about, given that AI is so omnipresent in other aspects of our lives, and we have AI helping us drive our cars and all that. Given all of that, why should or why might artists choose to make art with this kind of technology, or what is the value of deliberately trying to engage with it and trying to understand it in a way that maybe only we can, versus the way that technologists and developers and engineers maybe are interacting with and developing these AI? Like, what's the value of making art with these kinds of technologies? And to Casey's last point, maybe it's not of interest to everyone. To many poets, as I was saying before, this is not of interest. I think there's a strong feeling among many traditional writers and poets that writing tools that are powered by AI are in some way a bit of a cheat, or are maybe lazy or a shortcut. And I have lots to say about that I won't really get into, but I think there are many sort of reasons why people might decide not to engage with AI, but I'm also sort of wondering, do we have, do some of us have a responsibility to understand it and to think about it deeply, given that it is something that is profoundly reshaping almost everyone's daily life in a very significant way?
Yeah, and I would like think about that is that, you're in a way the kind of artistic strategy there, if you're going to engage with this technology, is then sort of agnostic, or like you're trying to then shed a light of like what it's doing, right? That's like one modality. The other modality, I guess, which I'm interested in, is more like a worlding one or a speculative one. It's not just questioning these tools that are everywhere, but that's what I'm attracted to. I'm interested in like what is going to be good for the world. That's not through critique.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's construction of something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's that's just talking about different modalities of art or artistic strategies.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering for all of you who are so immersed in this like human machine interface arena, do you ever feel like you're degrading your senses and your somatic experiences in order to come to a intellectual, I guess, playing field with the machine? And if so, what are some practices around regrounding yourself in the flesh world, in the physical world? Just open-ended.
Yeah, I think that's a very good and very valid question. I mean, when I showed that picture before of the piece with the black walnuts and the leaves and the grass, I mean, that was very directly a response to just feeling very much like I had lost a connection with my body and lost a connection with nature, just sitting in this same position, being in front of a screen for work, for writing, for research, for these collaborative writing sessions with a machine. I mean, I definitely did start to feel like I was just kind of all in my head, and really wanted to have a little bit more of a connection with my physical senses, and to go outside and to feel the fresh air, and to actually put my hands in the soil and all that. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so drawn in my work, and a lot of this is in the book too, in the relationship between technology and the natural world. And I think that against the backdrop of what was happening last year, I think a lot of us were getting a chance to sort of observe nature a little bit more closely than we normally have. We were taking things at a little bit of a different pace, and our focus was in a slightly different in a different arena. And at least for me, it did sort of force me to kind of reassess a lot of how I was using technology to mediate so much of my life, and just kind of reevaluating that a bit. So I think for me, the most effective, the most helpful way of kind of getting regrounded has been to step away from technology, from those kinds of digital technologies, and sort of observe it from a little bit of a different vantage point. And I think that's been really helpful in terms of getting a better perspective on what these technologies are bringing into our lives, and what we may need to sort of handle differently. So I think that for me has been really important, is getting a little bit of distance and objectivity from it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful to hear. And it kind of reminds me of this like pendulum effect, where you're kind of like swinging really heavily into the digital space of being very much in your head, and then swinging back the other way of being a naturalist or being in the environment. And it kind of reminds me of some, of some of the work that Daniel showed, where I think it was like a garbage bag of like these cords and cables and like the guts of the machine. And in a way, I'm so curious about this reliance on technology and hardware and these tools that are making our lives more connected in a way, but also what's the ecological impact? What resources? What's the energy capacity that we're using? And are the technological tools that we're able to use in our work, are they accessible to people? Or are they only accessible to a small margin of the population who are educated in that realm? And what really matters in our experience of being human? And I see these kids growing up like glued to the screen, and I think back to the time when I was growing up in the 90s, where I could play on seesaws and jump around in the playgrounds and have this like and play tag and have this like physical component be so much a part of my childhood. And I think about how that has totally changed to be more of this type of experience, and how that's a degrading like part of evolution in a way. Like I think about the movie Wall-E and how that's just like totally like the predictor of where we're headed. But just also very curious to hear more about, I think Casey, you mentioned your a garden project in which I didn't see any visuals, but I'm very curious about where technology and ecology and the blending of the natural and the digital world could go. And there's this term that I just recently learned from this artist named Rachel Rosin, who minted her DNA as an NFT. And it's this term called wetware, which is kind of, I think, something that might be related to what you were talking about, Casey, with kind of the biological and the technical components colliding into the future. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, that's a term I think from Gibson. Like it's a very cyberpunk term. It's like from the 80s, wetware. But in science, they do have wet labs, that's often used. It's like any living thing, biological. Yeah, I would also have to say that this technology we have is it's a technology that comes from a culture that believes in print. It's a print based. So it's like this technology we have is screens, printing press, all this stuff like that. It's but there's other cultures that didn't have that, right? So there's cultures that had knowledge, like the Inca with the knots, which it relied on feeling the textures of the knots to understand what it meant. So I imagine so those are differences to remember. So it's just kind of one modality. A lot of technology is used to, for histories, the way I understand it, or the way I interpret it, is basically to keep the swarm together. So the bigger the population, the more sort of, we're at this point really global. It relies more on, and there's studies on swarms it relies more on information transfer. Yeah, that's one thing. The other thing with what you're talking about, synthetic biology or wetware, is that a lot of the engineering principles, the reductionism and stuff like that, isolationism, even engineering terms are really popular. So I don't know. I don't think it's great. What's going? I have no idea. Yeah. And the other interesting thing is, which I program a little bit, and it kind of makes me feel crazy. But I know people who program, and they really like doing it in terminal. And they have this more intimate relationship with the computer, and it makes them feel more embodied in some sense. I think that's an interesting notion as well, that may be countering where you're aiming at, but it's interesting. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your questions, if I answered it. Yeah. Oh, and this is the thing about symbolic AI processing with category theory. It takes less energy, which I think is interesting as well. That's why I find it fascinating.
Yeah, I realize we're at time, so I don't want to go too far over, but I wanted to quickly just also bring up this idea of, so biotechnology is obviously really important in this idea of bringing together nature and technology, but I think a lot about plant intelligence also in my work and in the book. And I think it sort of stems from working so much with machines, especially with androids who are deliberately made as experiments in kind of prototyping a post-human consciousness, or basically kind of doing an experiment and what it means to be a sentient creature, has made me think a lot about other forms of non-human intelligence as well. And so I think a lot about, in my work with nature, I think a lot about the intelligence of plants and all the research that's been done and is being sort of brought to the forefront in terms of how plants are able to hold memories and how entire forests are able to actually communicate, and individual trees are able to basically pass, warning signals along to other creatures in the forest. I mean, this term of the wood wide web has sort of risen to prominence, and thinking about the mycelium as sort of related and very closely linked to the way we think about network systems, and how collective communities are linked together and can sync up and can become sort of a singular consciousness or a singular entity. So I think there's a lot of really, really interesting things that are happening right now that are starting to erode this sort of false binary of technology on one side and nature on the other. And I think, as much as I'm sort of inclined to say, I'm sick of being, at my computer all day long, I want to go outside, I'm also very conscious of the fact that, the opposite may also be true, that those things are not necessarily as opposed to each other as they might initially seem. So I think there's a lot of, really, really cool work, research, scientific research, as well as really interesting literary works being done on these themes. There's beautiful work by Richard Powers on some of these topics as well. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I guess it's after 3, so I don't want to keep anyone too much longer, but yeah, unless there's any like burning last questions, just, thank you so much for coming together to chat about these kind of heady topics a little bit. I feel like at least Casey and Daniel and I could probably sit here and like talk about it forever, but we won't. And thank you, Amber, so much for allowing us to organize a little event to talk about technology and AI and all these fun things, and hope to do it much more with this TAAS community in the future.
Thank you so much, Sasha, for bringing this idea. I really enjoyed this conversation. I also wanted to say that we have a tea time following, so if you guys want to keep the conversation going and all of that, we can head over to tea time as well. So we still have that session together. And if there's any last questions, I'm not in a huge rush. So if anybody has any burning questions, go ahead. Yeah,
I have a quick question, sorry, but I have to rush off as well. So, one thing that I don't understand it so well, but what I'm thinking is one of the issues that I think most people like me have is that we don't understand what's behind it. Like, how's this all made out of? We don't know. So that's why there's always this kind of like, I don't know, sensation of not wanting to let go to it or trust it as well, because we don't know what we use it, but we don't really know. I guess it's like our bodies or what's inside. We don't know what's inside a plant really, or inside our bodies, maybe. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, I guess I've spent a lot of time trying to like answer the question, like what exactly is going on, like at its most fundamental level, which is why I've been trying to like focus as simple as like a single pixel, like what can the algorithm do with the least amount of information that it has. And when it boils down to like, it's, I guess the principle is that that you can actually generate a lot of complexity from a relatively simple set of rules. And so like, it's like an AI algorithm is basically it's a combination of linear functions. And by linear functions, it's just like you've got an x and y axis, and then you've got points that like make 2 points basically determine a straight line. So it's the sort of ability to sort of plot things on this 2-dimensional, or like along these lines that can essentially like change the perform a function. And so it's like it's a simple equation, y equals mx plus b, and then from that's a linear equation, and then from that more complex nodes are developed. So you take a series of these linear equations, and then they can basically perform, you know, an enormous amount of like different kind of, like you can basically toggle or oscillate the different functions within the network in order to perform a particular task. So it's, you know, the values, the values of the network are all determined basically by numbers, that the like everything in the world is computable, you know, because a machine can understand it from the perspective of a values of its value as numbers. So it's just like rearranging the numbers in order to output new you know, new information.
I would say also, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So basically it's like computation. So if you're interested, look up computation. So there's also just like, in terms of the schema of computation, there's like only four big basic moves that you can do, what you're talking about in the algorithm, which are just like linear steps. It's like feedback, which is one loop. There's recursion, which is it's a loop that takes in whatever it's calculating. So it's almost like being self-aware in some sense. There's, so these are kind of a bigger thing of how it actually works. There's aggregation, which collects everything else. There's also the binary statement, yeah, yes, no, if, else. Those are other things. So that's a software side. And then there's also the hardware side, right? And that's like circuits, electricity, and more materiality. Combined together is what you're talking about. So yeah, I think those are the big ones. It's like software, but if you think about software, just like look up computation and you can find these sort of principles. And then the hardware design is a whole other situation, which is more electricity and gates and transistors and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know if that helps.
But also, just thinking about software and hardware and all that, I mean, how many of us know exactly how our computer works or how this Zoom software is operating, or
yeah, so
where the cables are that are linking us all together? I mean, I think in theory we kind of understand the sort of the bigger picture of it, but we don't understand the ins and outs, and we're still using these technologies every day. And there are a lot of things about these technologies that we're already using that we should probably know a lot more about, because they are very problematic. So I think, I mean, yes, it can be very intimidating. And I will be the first to admit I was very intimidated as a non-computer science person walking into this world. And, you know, also as a woman getting involved in artificial intelligence early on, I was very much, as a poet and as a woman, in a lot of the rooms that I was in and a lot of the conferences that I was in, was very, you know, intimidating. But the only way to learn about these things is just to try and just kind of get your hands into it. And I think for the most part, I've found that it's a lot less scary than it seemed at first. Like anything else, like any artistic tool that you use, or any artistic practice that you might be interested in, if you take a class on it, or if you attend lectures, you know, with people who are very knowledgeable about it, it sort of starts to become a language that you understand better and better. So I think because it seems intimidating, that's why a lot of creative people stay away from these technologies. And that's why the tech giants are doing what they're doing and kind of running wild with their platforms. So I think it's important for more of us to, you know, to conquer these fears head on and get involved, because it's really important for people that have different moral compasses and different ethical perspectives to come and be part of how we're shaping the future and how we're engineering our technologies.
I mean, I think that's a good point, though, is that it is a huge learning curve, and it's not what artists want to do, right? They're not just trying to learn this and implement it. They're trying to think critically about it. And that's I think that's interesting. Like how much knowledge do you need now? Maybe this is my own thing. How much knowledge do you need of a subject area to actually investigate it in like a meaningful artistic way? And the other problem with technology and with mathematics in general, it's that with mathematics, it's repeatable. The logic is very strong. You can keep repeating it. So it has a really hard scale possibilities. And this is also problematic. So this is why it's everywhere. So this is also why I'm learning math right now, because, you know, you're talking about these skills. It's just like category theory math. It's just, yeah, I don't know, but these are interesting questions, and something's going on though with art and in relation to this.
So Well, the last thing I'd say, Claudia, is that there's actually the black box within the neural network situation, which is basically that, like, fundamentally they don't know researchers don't know exactly how it's functioning. So like even professionals can't pinpoint it precisely, but I think that's sort of starting to change a little bit, and that'll probably get yeah, that'll probably sort of change soon. But I think in terms of both from like the technical standpoint, but from like the artistic standpoint or cultural standpoint, like trying to understand the implications of what something represents, that you can't fully, like if you can't fully sort of understand the mechanisms, then it's difficult to sort of analyze the like implications of what that represents in the world. And I think that's one of the interesting sort of like places we're in, the sort of blind spots that we're in sort of theorizing about AI from an aesthetics standpoint.
If you don't know black box, it means that you can't peer into it. It's used in engineering and science a lot.
But isn't it also like an actual experiment in which they ran a test through a computer, and it was like a translation test, and it was to test if machine learning was possible. And when they tried it with like different languages like Chinese, and what happened was the machine could translate like Chinese to the question that was posed by the person, the human person on the other end. But in that translation, even though it was correct, did that really mean that the machine understood what the question was? You know what I mean? I thought the black box. Yeah.
The black box is just a term that it's used in science and engineering that you don't know how it happened. Like it's literally, it's a thing that activates and you can't peer into it. So that's, and also this goes back to the neural processing, the deep learning. Symbolic AI is what you're talking about. It's something that they could understand it because there's symbols in it. And actually you can peer into it. So that's what's also interesting about symbolic AI. That's why, yeah, I'm more interested in that than neural nets. And so, but this shift might change with category theory. You might see more symbolic AI in the future. Yeah.
Maybe we need an AI class at TAAS at some point in the future. I'll keep talking about this for so long, but yeah, that's great. Well, I think we're all leaving with tons to think about. Yeah, this is certainly going to be an area that just continues heating up, and I think there's more and more artists getting involved in incorporating these kinds of tools into their practices. So it'll be really intriguing to see how things develop over the next few years. So stay tuned for more. Okay, well, unless, I don't know if anyone has any last comments, but otherwise, I know we're now running well over into the tea time event. So we should probably wrap it up, but thank you all so much for coming. It was great to chat and hear such awesome questions. And yeah, I look forward to seeing all of you again soon in our next class together.
Yeah. Congratulations, Sasha.
Yeah, congratulations. Thanks, Sasha.
Thanks
for the talk.
Around the world, teaching artists around the world. Artists around the world, teaching artists around the world.